Today, I write another page of Jesus' diary, my diary. There are days when the soul doesn't bleed, it simply sinks. Not because of fear, not because of danger, but because the weight of being unseen becomes too much to carry. This was my first full day in the desert, and it was the worst. Not because the sun scorched my skin, not because my lips were dry or my stomach empty, but because I had never felt so invisible. The silence from heaven wasn't just around me, it was inside me, like a locked door where I once heard a voice. And now nothing. I had followed that voice here, the one that once said, "This is my son." But now that same sky stared back at me with no sound, no answer, no comfort, only stillness. You see, people think pain is loud. They expect screams, storms, conflict. But this pain was quiet. So quiet it echoed inside me like a whisper that refused to leave. On that day, my faith wasn't tested by the enemy. It was tested by emptiness, by the absence of response, by the question, would I still walk, even when God doesn't speak? I sat in the dust, not in doubt, but in weight. A holy weight that pressed on my shoulders, not with condemnation, but with calling. And that was the part no one would ever see. The ache before the miracles, the silence before the storm, the loneliness before the light. If you've ever walked through a day like that, a day where your heart screamed, but heaven stayed silent. Like this video, because some of the loudest moments in our lives are made of silence. The air was sharp, like it had teeth. It didn't welcome me. It warned me. Dry wind scraped against my face like whispers turned into sand. The ground cracked beneath my feet with every step. Not because it was weak, but because I was. Each footprint felt like a confession pressed into the dust. A silent mark that said, he was here, and he was breaking. There were no birds, no insects, not even the occasional rustle of unseen life. Only space, only heat, only silence. The sun had no mercy. It stared at me without blinking, without pause. It wasn't warm. It was brutal, as if creation itself was asking, why are you here? I felt my robe cling to my skin, damp not with sweat, but with the weight of emotion I didn't yet have words for. Even my shadow looked tired, stretching behind me like a burden too heavy to carry. And inside me, something trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that this was only day one, only the beginning. I had no map, no time, no voice from heaven to mark the hours, just stillness and silence, and my own heartbeat, louder than anything around me. The desert was not violent. It was quiet, and that's what made it cruel. It didn't attack. It waited, and I just stood there, a son, a savior, a soul, trying not to fall apart beneath a sky that wouldn't speak back. He wasn't standing in front of me. He wasn't hiding behind a rock or waiting behind the wind. But he was there. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But he knew exactly where to sit. Right inside me. Not Satan. Not yet. But the doubt he had prepared. That part of me the world would never see. The part that wondered, what if my calling became my undoing? What if I was never meant to survive this? I had walked into the desert with purpose, but purpose can't protect you from questions. And now they came. Not like accusations, but like shadows, soft, slow, wrapping around my heart. What if he doesn't speak again? What if I misunderstood the voice at the river? What if this silence is the answer? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The weight was too heavy. Not on my shoulders, but beneath my ribs, where hope used to live. The first enemy I met was not a beast. It was the mirror inside me. And it didn't shout. It simply whispered, what if this pain is all there is? I sat down, on cracked earth, in dry wind, beneath a sky too still to be comforting. And in that silence I realized my battle had already started, but not against temptation. Not yet. The first war was against everything in me that still needed to be broken. Everything in me that still held on to comfort, to certainty, to the need for sound. And that's when I understood. The pain wasn't proof that I was alone. The pain was proof that I was finally in the place where heaven starts its deeper work. I fell to my knees, not in worship, not in fear, but because my legs could no longer carry what my heart refused to let go of. Everything in me, the part that remembered joy, the part that trusted without proof, the part that still longed for the sound of the Father's voice, collapsed. And there, in the silence of cracked ground and still skies, I let my tears fall into the dust, not because I lacked strength, but because even divinity, when clothed in flesh, feels the weight of what flesh was never created to carry. No one imagines this part. They see the miracles, the healings, the cross, but not this moment, the moment when my chest collapsed inward beneath the pressure of silence, when my soul whispered, "Am I still yours?" And the only answer was stillness. That was the worst part, not abandonment, but the haunting ache of almost forgotten, almost invisible, almost left alone in the place I was sent to become whole. And still, I stayed. I didn't run. I didn't summon fire. I didn't call down angels to lift me. I simply let the pain exist. Let it breathe, move past through me, like wind bending brittle branches, cracking, shaking, breaking, clearing space. Because before love can become action, it must first become surrender. And before surrender becomes sacred, it feels unbearable. That day, I gave up something I didn't know I was still holding, the right to understand. I stopped demanding clarity. I stopped searching for control. I opened my hands and let go. Let go of the comfort of certainty. Let go of the need to feel close. Let go of the desire for immediate peace. And in that surrender, something in me changed. Not because I suddenly felt better, but because I was no longer afraid, not even of the absence of feeling. I had made peace with the unknown, and that was the beginning of something holy. That was when the desert stopped being a place I entered and became a place I became. I didn't rise from that dust as the Jesus they would one day follow. I rose as the Jesus who would keep walking, without applause, without signs, without any guarantee that heaven would speak again. But I walked, one more step, not because I had clarity, but because I had commitment. This is the moment where pain begins to transform, not into victory, not yet, but into willingness. Willingness to carry the pain. Willingness to obey when it costs everything. Willingness to believe that silence does not mean absence. If you've ever sat in the dust of your own questions, if you've ever poured out prayers into a sky that didn't answer, if you've ever kept moving while your soul was begging to stop, then you already understand this desert. You've lived this page. And if this page of my diary has touched your heart, subscribe, not to a channel, but to the truth that even in silence, God is not gone. He is shaping. He is stripping. He is preparing. Because sometimes the first miracle isn't water into wine. It's sorrow into surrender. And this was my first miracle. That day, I learned something I had never heard in a temple. Something no scroll ever spoke of. Something only silence could teach. I learned that obedience isn't measured by strength, but by surrender. That trust is not built when the voice of God is clear, but when it disappears. And still, you remain. I thought the hardest part would be the fasting, the hunger, the weight of temptation. But it wasn't. The hardest part was standing in the absence of affirmation and still choosing to believe I was loved. Because love that requires a voice to exist is not love, it's reassurance. But love that survives silence is real. I didn't hear my father that day, but I remembered what he had once said, and I held on to it like breath, like bread. And in that holding, I discovered something sacred. That faith is not about always feeling close to God. It's about believing He's close, even when you don't. And perhaps that's what love truly is. Not the warmth of miracles, but the ache of trust in the dark. That day, I was not fed. I was not comforted, but I was changed. Because when love is silent, and you love it anyway, you become something new. Today, I didn't teach a crowd. I didn't open blind eyes. I didn't multiply bread or calm storms. Today, I broke, and that breaking didn't echo. It didn't shake mountains or split veils. It was silent, the kind of pain only the soul hears. But maybe that's how transformation begins. Not with fire, not with thunder, but with stillness. And with a single breath that chooses to remain. even when everything aches to escape. Today, I did not move mountains. I let them press down on me, and I did not run. I let the silence surround me until I could no longer tell where it ended, and I began. It was only day one, and it already felt like the end. But somewhere in that ache, I remembered, some things only grow in silence. Some things are only born when something else is allowed to die. I looked at the sky one last time before the light left. It didn't blink. It didn't speak. But I whispered anyway, I'm still here. And maybe that was the only miracle the desert needed today. So now I ask you, have you ever survived a day that no one understood? Have you ever carried a pain that no one imagined? Tell me, what was your day one? I said nothing. I let that moment become a word in my Jesus diary. And if someone ever hears these words, they'll know. This was another day in my Jesus diary. If this page from my diary spoke to a silence you've known, share it, not to spread my words, but to hold someone else's pain with them. There are others walking through their own desert right now, others who think they are forgotten, when in truth they're being formed. This is not just my story. It's the story of anyone who has ever remained faithful in a place that felt like absence. So let them know they are not alone. Let your click carry light. And if your heart is still listening, the next page is waiting on the screen. Click it, watch it, not because I asked, but because maybe he still whispers in the wilderness.